All right, good morning and welcome to Cliffview Chapel Baptist Church here in the small Red Rock town of Kanab, Utah. Some of you maybe that have tuned in have never been to Kanab. You're missing a real treat. Be sure you come on out sometime and visit in person. If you live close enough, come on out and join us. This is Sunday, September the 6th. Tomorrow is Labor Day, huh? And then we got 9/11 coming up in September, and then October brings hopefully a nice fall. We need some rain. I only remember raining once or twice during the monsoonal season. It wasn't much at all. So, has it rained much up at Bryce? No? Well, maybe that's the next thing, the drought, the worst drought. We always have drought, it seems like. We're in Esther. We're in the book of Esther, and we are basically finishing up this epic journey here. We're actually not finishing it all here. We're going to finish in the series that's starting this morning in the morning service, the last dozen books of it, the minor prophets. But Esther is part of that 12 historical books of the Old Testament. Joshua, Judges, Ruth kind of begins it, going into the promised land and conquering it, and the period of the judges and those people just going through cycle after cycle of rebellion and then being oppressed, and then a judge leader rescuing them, God having mercy, and them having a period of peace, and then it would cycle back through again. You have a little book of Ruth, which basically is a story that happens during the time of the judges. And then you go into those 6 historical books that are first and second, first and second, first and second. Reverse order, the Samuel, the Kings, the Chronicles, and that's all kind of covered up here. And then you go into the United Kingdom. I remember them asking Samuel that we want a king like the other nations have, and Samuel was grieved because he knew that God was their king. Why would they want a human king? But God says, no, go ahead. We'll give it to them. Sometimes we ask for things that we don't know what we're getting ourselves into, huh? And they had the United Kingdom with Saul and David and Solomon. That was kind of the peak around David and then Solomon's time, the epic peak of the kingdom of Israel. Then you went to the divided kingdom, and you see these 2 lines that show that divided kingdom there. Is it not? It is just really strange this morning, because that's not moving, is it? I'm here focusing in and moving it, and you're saying, what is he doing? I don't see a thing. So let me see if it... Good morning, Peter. How are you? Oh, no, you're good. What's that thing about a worm? Or no? Oh, better late... early bird gets a worm, and better late than never, right? I knew there was something like that. I didn't... Nah, that didn't really go over real well. You're more like salt of the earth. That's a compliment, isn't it? You're salt of the earth. Let's see if we can get this thing to work here. All right. Let's see. It's just not going to cooperate. But anyhow, we'll just blame it on the devil, right? So anyhow, we have the United Kingdom, or the divided kingdom, rather. And so we're at the point where we've already seen them go into exile and come back out. And you had Nehemiah, Ezra and Nehemiah, that told a lot about how they came back to Jerusalem and rebuilt the temple, rebuilt the city walls. Then you have this little book of Esther. And Esther is about the remnant left in Persian captivity. It was Babylonian captivity, and the Persians and Medes conquered Babylon. And then they took over, and they were essentially the ones that allowed much of the people to return, but there's still people in that captivity. And this is the story about how the Jewish population risked being entirely wiped out, eradicated and exterminated, and how this little queen, or this little young lady, virgin lady, who became queen, how she basically saves the kingdom, saves the Jewish people, essentially her people. So we're going to pick up with that in Esther chapter, put a note here, we should be at right around chapter 3 in Esther. Now, what was one of the things about Esther that's interesting about this book compared to all the rest of the books in the Bible? Maybe it's going to show up now. It's going to show up way up there, huh? What's that? Yeah, it doesn't actually have the name of God, but it has the providence of God all over. And it's a nice lesson for us because sometimes if we don't see evidence of God in something, doesn't mean he's not working in it. Like you don't see a direct evidence of God in people talking about him or mentioning his name or sermons preached about him in this book, but you can see his providence is all over the book, his fingerprint there. So we have her at verse number 17 of chapter 2, and the king loved Esther above all the women, because remember, Vashti, his previous queen, would not come in and put a show on for the guys. All the princes and all his people that he brought in, he was going to use his trophy wife to show the guys, look what I have. And so she refused, so he banished Vashti, the king did. And so the king says, bring some of the girls in, and I'm going to look for my next queen. And Esther, a Jewish girl, which they really didn't understand to be a Jewish girl when she was coming in, she knew it, her people knew it, but it was kind of a covert thing. She comes in, and she is the one that he chooses. So in verse 17, and the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So you got to think, if he gets rid of queens that easy, you're vulnerable too. You have no security necessarily. So Mordecai, at the end of chapter 2, if you remember, Mordecai saves the king's life because he is there and he hears a conspiracy being hatched that for these two men to kill the king. And so he tells the king, those men are hung on a tree, and so Mordecai is elevated. He's given some position here. And this, what we do is start chapter 3. So you have this guy, his name is Haman in verse 1 of chapter 3. It says there, and after these things did King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agatite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. So this is a big kingdom. So there's lots of these princes that are over these smaller sections of it, way spread out. In fact, I don't know, I'd be afraid to see if I could show this map. Was it even going to show up? No, it's not. Forget it. So this is a big kingdom. So there's all these princes, hundreds of princes. Well, he's going to set Haman like his vice president in charge. And it says in verse 2, and all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman. This guy was on an ego trip. He wanted this. For the king had so commanded him. But Mordecai bowed not, neither did he him reverence. So Mordecai's not bending a knee. And we have a lot of that going on. All right? You're not bending the knee to this guy. And so the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, in verse 3, why transgresseth thou the king's commandment? And so it's a public thing that people are seeing. In verse 4, and it came to pass when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he told them that he was a Jew. And so we go to verse 5, and when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, neither did him reverence, then was Mordecai full of wrath. Angry man, and he's thinking Mordecai's going to pay for this. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone. That wouldn't be a good idea, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai, all these Jewish people that was of his group. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom, even the people of Mordecai. So why just get Mordecai? Let's go for all of them, all of his people. That way it would eliminate my problems in the future, because if we get Mordecai, there's going to be more Mordecais out there. So what's he do? In verse number 7, in the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Mordecai from day to day and from month to month. So this is a yearly thing. And verse number 8, and Haman said unto the king Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws, therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, in verse 9, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business to bring it unto the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agathite, the Jews' enemy. Interesting, the Jews' enemy. This guy's public enemy number one for him, isn't it? Now he's going to take this ring and he's going to do something that is going to make this so permanent that even he can't undo it. The king can't undo it. Verse 10, and the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the Jews' enemy. Verse 11, and the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. So you've got my authority. You got the ring. You can stamp the orders, and they'll see if they're authentic. So go take care of it. Manage it for me. Get rid of these people. And so we go to verse 13, and the letters were sent by post, USPS, into all the king's province, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to take the spoil of them for prey. So this is what he did. He wrote this, he sealed it in verse number 12 with the king's ring. So it's been notarized, so to speak. And this is being sent out to all these different scattered provinces under this king. And they're going to say it on one day, we're going to do a complete eradicate or complete extermination of all of them, even the kids, and sparing no one. Verse 14, and a copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. And the post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan, the palace. That's the kind of the capital there where all this was happening. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. So they get this news, we're killing the Jews. Haman comes in, sits down with his king, his boss, and basically they're just going to have a drink and just business as normal. And Haman's thinking, boy, Mordecai thought he was going to pull one over on me. He and his people are going to die. Well, it's a set day and it is approaching. So chapter 4 basically, Mordecai calls the people and he puts out a fast in verse number 1 of chapter 4. And when Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. So it looks bleak, obviously. Here is a decree. On a day, all of us are going to die. So all we can do is mourn. We can fast. This is a serious matter. And verse 2, and it came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So this is a pretty dramatic scene. If they had had major news networks, everybody would have tuned into it to see the carnage on the streets of these people just have been emotionally defeated and they're waiting for death. So here, enter Esther, okay, verse 4. And Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it to her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved. Those are my people. They're going to die. Those are my people. And she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take him away from his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. No, I'm going to continue mourning. She's thinking, I got to get him out of this. I need his help. Then, verse 5, then called Esther from Hatach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend under her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Queen Esther wants to know more about why this is happening. So in verse 8, and she gave him a copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan, to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare unto her, and to charge her that she should go into the king to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for her people. So, they're going to send her this document, this decree. Look, what's going to happen. You are our only hope. You've got to go before the king. You've got to take a stand. And in verse number 11, and all the king's servants and the people of the king's providence do know, and that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king, into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. So Esther's saying, I can't go see him. He's not made a request to see me for at least the last month. And if I go in there unannounced, it's death, unless at the very last he raises his scepter and gives me some kind of exemption. But that could be a rarity. There's no guarantee there. Esther's thinking, my life is on the line. My position's on the line. So what happens? And they told in verse 12, Mordecai, Esther's words. Your cousin is not really very fond of doing what we've asked her to do. Verse 13, the Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. In other words, Esther, you're a Jew, and it's not widely known. And you think, well, if you just play this out, you'll live. The rest of us won't, but you will. But that may not be the way it works. It may be discovered that you're Jewish, and you may die anyhow. So if you're going to die anyhow, why not at least die trying to save all of us, save God? I mean, this is all God's people. This is the Jewish people. To exterminate them in all that area, it would make a significant impact to the whole storyline that God has. And the line of Christ, we noticed, things just slow popping up in it. We noticed over here on this line of Christ is dependent upon sequential things happening. And this could interfere with it. So in verse 15, I actually back up to verse 14. Now watch what Mordecai says unto her. And there's a phrase in here that's well known and well used as we see God working in situations. Let's look at it. Verse 14. For if thou altogether, this is Mordecai telling Esther, if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. You know, Esther, if you don't do this, there probably will be a way that God is going to deliver us. But you know what? Your father, his people, you are not going to be privy to that. You need to do something. The rest of the verse. And who knoweth whether thou art come to this kingdom? Who knows whether you have the place of a queen? Odds that you would have, but you are. For such a time as this. Have you heard that phrase before? For such as a time as this. Sometimes God puts things in a certain place, certain time, because the timing needed to be that way. For such a time as this. I don't know if you've asked yourself, when something seemed to be blessed and turn out for the glory of God, you're asking, how would I have known this? Why now? Why here? And then you think back, well, God's providence makes things for such a time as this. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go, verse 16, go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, neither eat nor drink 3 days, night and day. I also, my maidens, will fast likewise. And so I will go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. If I die, I die. There were worse things, huh? You gotta admire her. At first, she was timid about doing it. But then when Mordecai told her, this is the time God's going to use you, she says, you pray, you fast. But if I go in there and I die, well, I die. Verse 17, so Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. In chapter 5, then it came to pass on the third day, Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat up on his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther, the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. Now, how do you think that favor came about? Providence of God. He can sway the hearts of who he wants. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near, probably caught her breath, and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, what wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be given thee to the half of thy kingdom. Now, he must be in a very generous mood that day. Not only is he letting her in, but he's saying, oh, come here. What do you want, darling? In fact, I'll give you whatever you want, up to 1/2 of this whole kingdom. Now, that's not a small change. And notice, and then verse 5, then the king says, calls Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. Isn't this ironic? This very man who's planned the demise of all the Jewish people, including Mordecai, now is being commanded by the king, come and whatever Esther, my queen, tells you, you do it. Make haste, so that the king and Haman may come to I skipped verse 4, didn't I? Go back to verse 4, and that verse 5 will make sense. Then Esther answered. So in verse 3, the king says up to half. Verse 4, and Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto a banquet that I have prepared for them. I'm going to do a dinner for you guys. So I want both of you there. So the king says, okay, go get Haman and tell her to get here right away because there's a banquet. We're going to eat. Verse 6, and the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? He's already said you can have up to half. And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king has said. I'd like for my request that you come back to another banquet. I want to do this again. Okay, she's setting this up. So they went forth, then went Haman forth, in verse 9, that day joyful and with a glad heart. And when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Verse 10, nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends. And verse 11, and Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. And Haman said, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she prepared, but myself. And tomorrow I am invited unto her also with the king. Yea, all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting in the king's gate. I mean, I could have exclusive invitation after exclusive invitation, but I'm so mad at Mordecai that as long as he denies me, I just can't rest. So then, in verse 14, then said Zeresh, his wife, and all of his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king that Mordecai may be hung thereon. Then go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he calls the gallows to be made. So here he is. Yes, that's a plan. Let's make this gallows a nice tall one. We'll kill him, and then I'll be happy. But he didn't realize, we're going to see in the story, that it's not Mordecai that hangs from those gallows. It's he himself. There's going to be a twist here in this plot. So in chapter number 6. So in chapter 6, verse 1, and on that night could not the king sleep. That was last night, right, for some of us? And he commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. So who do you think put that restlessness in him so he couldn't sleep? So he would have to stay up and have the record read to him. Verse 2, and it was found written that Mordecai told of Bigthana and Tersha, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hands on the king. Verse 3, and the king said, what honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? So his memory's refreshed, that Mordecai saved his life. Oh, by the way, have we ever paid him back for that? And they're saying, none. Then said the king's servants that minister him, nothing's been done for him. And verse 4, who is in the court right now? Who's on duty? Now Haman was come into the outer court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai. So Haman's on his way in to get permission to hang Mordecai. The king is in there thinking, I haven't rewarded Mordecai yet. See the timing for such a time as this? So verse number 5, and the king's servant said unto him, behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king says, well, let him come in. And verse 6, Haman came in, and the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now what's Haman thinking? He's talking about me. Well, man, this is my chance to juice this up good, huh? Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to be honored more than himself? Then Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rides upon, his own apparel, his own horse, and the royal crown which is set upon his head. He would be almost like king himself, huh? And let this apparel and horse be delivered into the hand of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal, whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him that it shall be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Then the king said to Haman, good plan, huh? Make haste, quickly do this, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew. Can you imagine Haman's expression? Changed real quick, didn't it? He thought he was the man he was talking about. Even so do to Mordecai that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken, and do it to the letter of the law. Verse 11, then Haman took the apparel and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and brought him on horseback through the street of the city and proclaimed before him, thus it should be done unto the man whom the king delighteth. Verse 12, and Mordecai came again unto the king's gate, but Haman hastened to his house, mourning and having his head covered. Boy, isn't that a twist of things here, a reversal, really. Verse 14, and while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains and hastened to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. So remember, there's still this banquet. So now Haman's depressed, sad. And in verse 7 it tells about this banquet. And we'll save that for next time because we're not going to do it justice in 2 minutes to get through that part of the story. So it's an interesting story, isn't it? You can almost think that this would be a great movie, and there have been some films in the past made of the story of Esther. There's so much as far as timing and little details that does not escape God's attention that we ought to take great delight in, because we know those are things are part of that. All things work together for good unto those who are called according to his purpose. And sometimes it doesn't seem like it. When the decree went out the Jews were going to die on a certain day, that didn't look good. And those people are sad. And perhaps God is looking at them saying, just wait. There's a plan. And you just got to trust me. Huh? So when it doesn't sometimes look good, we know the ultimate end of the plan is we share the kingdom of heaven with God forever. So no matter how grim and bad it looks now, it's a predetermined destiny. And they didn't necessarily have that, did they? Have a prophecy of how it was all going to work out. They were playing it out day by day. We have a sure word of prophecy that tells us how it ends. So we even should have greater faith and greater confidence. Let's thank the Lord for that. Father, thank you for this great story. Father, we often think of what would we do if we were in those people's shoes. We have the trust to say, if I perish, I perish. And Father, for we know for us that would be just a gain. This earth's loss is heaven's gain, Father. Thank you, Father, for this story, and may our faith be strengthened by it. Prepare us for the service to come, and we'll give you the